Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Yesterday I watched a German fantasy movie and today I thought I'd chat a little bit about that. The movie that I watched is this one. It's called Krabat, in German at least, and maybe in English as well. I think in Dutch it's called Meester van de Zwarte Molen. And this is a film based on the German book Krabat by Ottfried Preußler. And the story is about a boy called Krabat who ends up working at a mill, and the longer he works there, he kind of starts to realise that something sinister is going on at this mill, and like he hears about a boy who used to work at the mill who died, and during his time there some people die as well, so he starts to learn that there's something strange going on, and eventually finds out that the master of the mill is using black magic, and he teaches the other boys who are working at the farm black magic as well, and eventually he starts to teach Krabat as well. One of the things that happens when Krabat decides to work at this mill is that he can no longer leave, like the master has him in his power and he can no longer make choices for himself. So like the main plot line, I guess, is around finding a way to escape from life at the mill. It's been a while since I read the book, but I've read it several times and I do think it's an amazing book. Especially it's great to read during autumn because it definitely has this like dark, spooky vibe because it's set in this remote location, and for a while you don't really know what's going on, and there's something sinister going on with the master of the mill. It's definitely a book that I would recommend for reading in autumn. But yeah, this video is specifically about the film that I recently watched. I will immediately say I don't think the film is as good as the book. The book is amazing, I think, and the film mostly was a decent, enjoyable fantasy movie. I don't think it's anything special, but I also don't think it's too bad. It was definitely enjoyable. Initially I did have like more issues with it, especially the main character. His acting, I felt like initially I was just very much watching an actor act and I wasn't really seeing the character, but as time went on I did start to see the character more, and I felt like more and more immersed in the story, and that was the same with some of the other characters and acting as well, especially the relationship between Krabat and the other boys at the mill. Initially felt a little bit cartoonesque, like they were bullying him, but it just seemed to come out of nowhere and it just seemed very random and over the top, and then later they were suddenly like being very cheerful, and it just seemed like such a random transformation. But later on in the film I feel like the relationships between the characters seem more realistic, so the film definitely improved as it went on, in my opinion. While I don't necessarily think it's the best fantasy movie ever, I do think it's a really fun movie to watch during this time of year because it definitely has that dark and mysterious vibe from the book. I do think the book is a little bit more mysterious, but there are definitely some great shots in the film, like the lighting. It's very dark, and yeah, it's set in this very remote place, and you get these shots of like ravens flying over the snowy landscapes, so I really enjoyed the cinematics of it. One thing that's also a little bit different from the book, and that makes sense because it's a movie, but that's the timeline. That also felt a little bit off in the beginning of the movie because it seems to move so fast. In the book I think there's a longer period where Krabat doesn't really know what's going on, and by seeing things on screen I think you automatically make a lot of things more visible and clearer what's going on, whereas in the book it's for a longer period of time you're kind of unsure what's happening, whereas in the film it's more explicit. And the timeline moving so fast I think also takes away a little bit of the sort of the gravity of the situation that Krabat is in, because in the book I believe he's at the mill like 3 years, and there's this sort of cycle that's happening at the mill that I don't really want to spoil, but he sees that happening a few times in the book, so there's more of a sense of dread about what's going to happen next because he's seen it before, I think. And in the movie you just get that cycle only like once it's completed, and then I don't know. I don't want to spoil the rest. I do think the longer time period definitely works a lot better than it does in the film, also because there is kind of like a romance in the book and the film as well, and it's definitely not the focus of the book. It's very much a side plot, I would say, even though it does play a big role in some way. But I felt like in the film it felt much more insta-lovey, whereas in the book, even though there's not a lot of time spent where these characters like spend time together to get to know each other, but still, because like the book just takes a longer time in general, and because it's just told in a different way, it feels a little bit more distant in the way it's told in the book, and because of that, to me, it did feel a little bit less insta-lovey, and I didn't mind it so much. I think also because the book has more of a kind of fairy tale or legendary vibe, whereas the film makes it seem a little bit more like fantasy that's grounded more in reality. Also because there's more contact, I feel like, in the film between the boys from the mill and the people in the village where the girl lives, and that also makes them seem more like real people, whereas in the book they lead this kind of remote life and they're these mysterious boys, and that kind of makes them more of these legendary figures. I feel like that the romance didn't bother me as much. But even though I have these reservations about the acting and the timeline, it was definitely very enjoyable, mostly because of the atmosphere, and some of the acting was actually really good. I especially liked Krabat's friend Tonda, like the actor, how he played that character. I thought it fitted really well with what he was like in the book. There was also this other character, I can't quite remember, I looked it up, I think he's called Robert Stadlober, and he just looks so much like a young Viggo Mortensen, who plays Aragorn in The Lord of the Rings. So every time I saw him, I was like, oh my god, they look so much alike. So I would like someone else to confirm, but you know, they are practically twins. I also like the acting of the girl that Krabat falls in love with, because she definitely, to me at least, made this insta-love a lot less annoying. Somehow she did make it kind of convincing that they sort of would fall in love so quickly. One thing that did bug me a little bit, like I didn't so much mind the acting that, you know, could have been better in some parts, but one thing I didn't like, there was some kind of ableist element to the story. It wasn't like didn't take up a lot of time, but I felt like, yeah, it just wasn't handled in a great way. And it's been a long time since I read the book, so I don't quite remember, but I do think it was probably there in the book as well, but I feel like it was handled more poorly in the film. Like it was even I don't know if it was ableist, to be honest, in the book, but I definitely feel like it definitely was worse in the film, and I just don't understand it, because the book is from the 70s and the movie is, I don't know from what year, but definitely a lot more recent, so I kind of don't understand why they just made it worse. But yeah, basically to give some context to the like ableism, it's basically there's a character that is sort of referred to as stupid by the other characters, and they just are very mean to him and don't take him seriously, and in the end it's sort of explained away by, oh, he was never actually stupid, he was just acting that way to like avoid being a target. But yeah, I just don't think that was handled very well, and I just don't think it should have been in there. Like, it just wasn't necessary. But while I definitely, like as I mentioned, did have my reservations and I didn't like everything about this movie, it was definitely very enjoyable, and I think it's a really fun movie to watch if you want to watch something like dark and spooky without it being super scary. And what I also liked is that while initially there was kind of a little bit too much drama between the boys that I just wasn't enjoying, like eventually I really liked how they, even though they were kind of in a situation where it was difficult to trust other people, they sort of had this like bond going on, like we are all in the same kind of shitty situation together. And yeah, that also created like interesting relationship, I think. Also, what I thought was interesting was how the kind of way that the master of the mill was acting, because in some way he was definitely like a bad person, but at the same time he did also have redeeming qualities to him, and at times, even though he was like posing a danger to the boys at the mill, he was sort of also kind of giving up the vibe that he was actually trying to protect them. And I do think that made him a lot more of an interesting character than in a lot of fantasy movies where it's very black and white and the villain is just completely evil and there's just no redeeming quality to him whatsoever, or there's just no way you could ever understand what he's doing. But I didn't feel that way in the movie, so that was really good, I thought. But I do think maybe that it would be a good idea to read the book first. I mean, a lot of people who are readers at least would say that probably, but I do feel like you might also understand some things a little bit better because there's not really a lot of explanation in the film about the magic. And while I don't remember if it's there in the book, I don't feel like it bothered me because of I think the things that are left unanswered in the book kind of fit with the sort of mysterious atmosphere of like not completely knowing what's going on, and in that sense it doesn't bother me that not everything was explained. But then in the film there were some scenes that I think if you haven't read the book you will be left with some questions, like what actually happened there, why did it happen. So mostly I just want you to go read the book because I do think the book is really great. But yeah, if you are looking for a dark fantasy film that's not like too scary, it's definitely not horror or anything, then I would recommend this film. I think it's very enjoyable, and it was also just fun watching a fantasy film in a language other than English, because most of the fantasy films and series that I watch are English, so it was fun to watch a German fantasy series and film. And I would definitely be interested in seeing other fantasy films from like different cultures, so if you have any recommendations for fantasy films or series that aren't in English, please let me know in the comments. And I'd also be very interested to hear if you've read the book Krabat or if you have seen the movie maybe. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe I'll see you next time. Bye!